As I climbed the stairs of the apartment building that afternoon, my hands were full, and my heart was at peace. I had walked to the grocery store as always, with my canvas bag and the list I had penciled on a piece of paper and tucked into my apron pocket. I only bought the essentials, some rice, soap, coffee, and 2 red apples that were on sale. As I ascended, I wondered if Doris might want to have lunch with me, as she sometimes did on Saturdays. She liked my cinnamon rolls and said, "My coffee is different, better, stronger." On the 3rd floor, I paused to catch my breath. The elevator had been broken for weeks, but it didn't bother me. I liked to go up slowly, observing the building's walls, the withered plants no one watered, the hand-painted numbers on the doors. When I finally stood before my apartment door, I saw something that made me stop abruptly. My belongings. My belongings stood there in 2 cardboard boxes, soaked from the rain that must have fallen while I was at the grocery store. One box was half open. Inside, I saw a carefully folded white blouse, now stained brown with dirty water on the floor. Next to it was the box where I kept my photo albums. My heart began to pound faster.
Il rang the bell once, noting.
I rang again. I heard footsteps from inside. Then the door opened. Christian stood there with an expression I couldn't comprehend. It wasn't anger, it was discomfort, disdain. Something in his gaze wasn't the son I had raised. Behind him, in the dim light of the living room, Amber sat on the sofa with her arms crossed. She looked at me without a word, as if I were an intruder. Christian didn't greet me, he just said softly and in a neutral tone, "My wife feels uncomfortable with you here, Mom. We talked about it and think it's better if you leave today." I stood there with my bags in hand. My fingers trembled, but I didn't let go. I hoped he would say something else, laugh, hug me, say it was a joke, but nothing. He lowered his gaze for a second, then raised it again. "Your things are there. We didn't know if you were coming back, so we left them outside." He gestured with his head toward the boxes. There were no shouts, no insults. It was much worse. It was a cold, polite eviction, disguised as logic. Amber didn't even get up from the sofa. She stared at her phone screen as if I didn't exist. A neighbor came down the hall and saw me standing motionless before the half-open door, bags in my arms, my gaze fixed on my son. I said nothing, reacted not, pleaded not. I only felt the weight of the years crashing onto my shoulders in a single blow. I lowered my gaze and saw my wet boxes. A cockroach crawled between the cardboard flaps. I bent down, set the bags aside, and carefully picked up the first box, which began to disintegrate slightly in my hands. Christian watched me impassively. Amber was no longer visible. I remained silent. I laboriously straightened up with the box and descended the first step of the stairs. Then I retrieved the second box. My knees ached. Dirty water dripped from the cardboard, staining my skirt. No one helped me. No one stopped me. When I emerged from the building, I sat on the bench at the bus stop. I placed the boxes beside me. Trembling, I opened one. Among wet clothes and crumpled papers, I saw a picture frame without glass, holding a photo of Christian on his first day of school. He was years old. He smiled toothlessly, wearing the dinosaur backpack I had hand-sewn for him. I stared at the photo for a long time. A car drove by, splashing dirty water and drenching me. I didn't move. I carefully closed the box, though it was meaningless now. Its corners had come undone. I thought of Joyce, that she might take me in for a few days. I wondered if Doris knew what they had done. I hesitated. Perhaps she would think I was a burden, that I was in the way, that it would be better if I left, that I no longer had a place in that house, that I had helped pay for. I remembered every hour of overtime I had worked as a substitute teacher to save money for that apartment. I remembered the sleepless nights I had nursed Christian when he had a fever. The times I humbled myself to ask for favors so he could study, the lonely Christmases, the times I ate stale bread so he could have meat on his plate, all of it now in 2 wet boxes. I stood up and walked slowly to the corner. It was raining again, a fine, sad drizzle, as if even the sky were tired. Joyce lived 7 blocks away. I walked slowly. With every step, something within me broke and, simultaneously, rebuilt itself. I wouldn't cry, not yet, not on the street, not in front of other people. I arrived at Joyce's house and rang the bell. "Victoria, are you all right?" she said as she opened the door. "You're soaking wet. Please come in." I said nothing, just walked in with the boxes. Joyce didn't ask questions. She brought me a towel and a hot tea. As she dried me off, I opened the other box. There it was, the green notebook I had used when I worked at the neighborhood library. Inside, between the pages, lay a folded letter. It was from Christian, written in shaky handwriting. "Mom, when I grow up, I'll buy you a house with a garden. You'll live with me forever. I love you more than anything." A lump formed in my throat. Joyce looked at me, silently. I just said, "I won't cry, Joyce, not anymore." I closed the letter, put it back in the notebook, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something awaken within me. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay on Joyce's sofa with a thin blanket she had taken from the closet. But sleep wouldn't come. I lay still, staring at the ceiling, listening to the kitchen clock tick, each second a hammer blow against my chest. Joyce had long since fallen asleep, respecting my silence. She didn't press me further, just gave me a brief hug before turning off the hall light. I lay in the dimness, searching every corner of my memory, as if looking for a logical explanation for what had happened, but I found none. When had my son stopped seeing me as his mother? When had I transformed from an essential part of his life to a silent obstacle? I closed my eyes and tried to recall the early years. When Christian was little, I worked at 3 different schools. At one as a homeroom teacher, at another as a tutor, and on Saturdays, I gave private lessons at home. I woke up at 5 a.m. and carefully prepared his lunch: rice, beans, a banana, and a homemade cookie. I always put a note in his backpack: "I love you, Christian. Be strong, Mom." Sometimes I drew a smiley face. He replied with drawings of dinosaurs or stars. He was so tender it broke my heart. I never had help. His father, Austin, left us when Christian was 2 years old. He said he would look for work in another city and never came back. He left me with debts, overdue rent, and a son who asked for his father every day. Elite. I told him his father was a hero who saved people. I couldn't let Christian grow up hating the man who had abandoned him. After all, he was his flesh and blood. For years, I hid my pain, my exhaustion, my loneliness. I had no time to complain. I remember one night Christian had a high fever, and I couldn't call anyone. I carried him in my arms and ran to the nearest hospital. It was raining, he was shivering and crying. I was scared. We arrived completely drenched. The doctor said it was an infection, caught just in time. That night, I slept on a plastic chair with Christian in my arms. When he woke up, he told me I was his superhero, that he never wanted me to let go. When did he forget that? When he was 15, he started to change. He became quieter. I continued to work without pause, but always tried to be there for him. On Sundays, I cooked his favorite meal, lasagna with white sauce. Sometimes I sat outside his room, listening to music through the door, trying to understand him. I didn't want to disturb him. I just wanted him to know I was there. Then came college. That was the hardest time, but also the one I was most proud of. I sold my wedding ring to finance his first semester. He told me everything would change, that he would take care of me after graduation, that we would travel, that he would give me a peaceful life. I didn't need that. I only wanted his company. When he met Amber, something in him was lost. She was different, cold, elegant. She always treated me like an old piece of furniture that was in the way in the living room. At first, I tried to please her. I gave her a linen cloth I had embroidered myself. She looked at it as if it were trash. "Thank you, Miss Victoria," she said with a forced smile. Christian didn't notice, or didn't want to see. Gradually, my Sunday meals became shorter, then they were cancelled, then I wasn't told anything at all, until one day they suggested I move in with them to save costs. I agreed without hesitation. I wanted to be close. I wanted my son back, but the house wasn't mine. I knew that. Every step I took felt like an intrusion. Every word I spoke was weighed, judged. Amber had a passively aggressive tone that wore me down. Once, she asked me not to use the main bathroom because she kept sensitive products there. Another time, she hid the large knives, saying she wasn't used to someone else cooking. Christian remained silent. He always remained silent, and so did I, because I preferred that to being alone again. I settled for seeing Doris running through the hall, hearing her laughter, helping her with homework. She was my light, my little accomplice. One afternoon, when Amber was at the gym and Christian was at work, Doris asked me to tell her a story. I told her the story of the bird that built its nest all by itself from branches no one wanted. She looked at me and said, "Like you, Grandma, you also built everything alone." I felt my heart would break. I hugged her tightly. It was one of the few moments of sincerity in that house full of silence. But even these moments began to disappear. Amber started taking Doris to activities all day: piano lessons, English lessons, swimming lessons. I was left alone at home, as if I were in the way. Sometimes I locked myself in my room and cried softly. Once, I heard Amber on the phone saying, "I don't know how much longer we can put up with this. It's like having a shadow in the house that neither helps nor contributes anything." I clenched my fists, but didn't respond. Christian came into the room that evening, looked at me briefly, and said, "Don't worry about it, Mom. Amber is stressed." I felt invisible, as if my presence were a problem to be solved, as if my history, my commitment, my years were worth nothing. I remembered the photo album Christian and I had put together when he was 8 years old. On each page was a sentence from him: "Mom taught me to ride a bike. Mom makes the best soup in the world. Mom hugs me tight when I'm scared." Where had that boy gone? Where had that tenderness gone? That night, on Joyce's sofa, I felt a chasm open within me. It wasn't pain, it was clarity, a cold silence that permeated me. I had lived my entire life for others. First for Austin, who had left me, then for Christian, who had forgotten me. I no longer wanted to beg for a place in others' lives. I didn't deserve that, not after all I had given. I quietly got up. I walked barefoot into the kitchen. The refrigerator light illuminated my face as I opened it. I took a glass of water and sat at the table. The green notebook lay open on the page where Christian had promised to buy me a house with a garden. I reread it, then closed the notebook and took a deep breath. I wouldn't cry, I wouldn't beg. What I would do from that moment on was not revenge, but justice. Silent, precise, and deserved. The next day, I woke before sunrise. Joyce was still asleep in her room, and the house was quiet. I sat on the edge of the sofa, feet on the cold floor, and looked at my hands for a moment. They had changed. They were no longer the soft hands of a young woman. They were hands that had washed clothes with soap and stone, that had held gnawed pencils while correcting notebooks, that had tended scraped knees and cooked thousands of meals. They were lived hands. Hands that deserved respect, not pity. I put on simple clothes, a white cotton blouse, a long blue skirt, and my most comfortable shoes. I braided my hair and quietly left Joyce's house. I walked to the bus stop and got on without much thought. I knew exactly where I needed to go. I got off downtown, walked 3 blocks, and stopped in front of a glass door with gold lettering that read Roberts and Associates Law Firm. I had passed this place many times but had never dared to enter. Today, I pressed the bell. A young man opened the door with a professional smile. "Do you have an appointment?" he asked. "No, but I need to speak to someone who understands property rights and family matters," I replied, determined. A few minutes later, I sat opposite a woman in her 50s with thick glasses and a sharp gaze. Her name was Teresa. I told her my story. I left nothing out. I spoke calmly in detail with long pauses. She listened without interruption, taking notes. When I finished, she clasped her hands on the desk and said, "You have rights, Ms. Victoria, many of them, and we can enforce them. Are you ready for that?" I nodded without hesitation. I left the office with a folder in my hand. Inside were copies of documents I had kept for years, the contract for the house I had helped pay for, receipts for purchases made in my name, proof of transfers I had made to Christian during his studies. Teresa told me that all of this was useful, that I was not alone. Then I went to the bank and froze my joint account with Christian. It was an account he used for some bills, and into which I still deposited part of my pension. I also cancelled an additional credit card in his name. I made it clear that no transactions were to be made without my authorization. Then I went to the insurance company. I cancelled the policy covering my life with Christian as the beneficiary. I didn't say why, I just signed the papers and left. I felt a strange relief, as if with each signature, a stone had been lifted from my shoulder. That afternoon, I returned to Joyce's and sat at her computer. I asked for permission to use it, and she gave it to me without question, with a conspiratorial gesture. I logged into my emails, searched through old messages, and found one I had ignored for years, an offer from a small publishing house that wanted to publish my children's stories. I wrote back, telling them I still had the manuscript and that we could talk if they were still interested. I also sent a message to Doris from my private email address. I wrote that I missed her, that I was doing well, and that we would talk soon. I didn't expect a reply. I just wanted her to know I was thinking of her. In the following days, Joyce helped me sort my belongings. We washed my clothes, organized my books, and dried everything that was damp. One by one, I opened the boxes Christian had left like trash outside the door. In one, I found a yellowed envelope. Inside was a drawing of him when he was 7 years old, he and I eating ice cream in a park. Behind it, in childish handwriting, it read, "Mom, always together." I closed my eyes. I took a deep breath. That sentence didn't break my heart. It gave me strength, because I understood that a mother's love doesn't disappear, it transforms. But I also learned that this love must not be a chain. It must not bind me to a place where I was no longer welcome. I decided to find a new place to live. Joyce accompanied me to a small room in a shared apartment with other older women. It was modest, but it had light. It had a window overlooking a garden with geraniums and a small wooden table next to the bed. I sat down and felt I could start anew. Not as an exile, but by my own decision. I called Teresa and told her I was ready to initiate legal proceedings. She explained that it wouldn't be easy, that Christian might react poorly, and that Amber would certainly try to manipulate the situation. But I wasn't afraid. I had fought many battles alone. This would just be one more. I did something else. I bought a small security camera and asked a friend of Joyce's, an IT technician named Sean, to install an app on my phone. I knew Christian still had keys to the apartment, and if he tried to enter without permission or move my belongings, I wanted to be prepared, not for revenge, but for my protection. I went to the apartment one last time while they were out. I took my photo albums, some old dishes from my mother, and the wooden box where I kept my letters, documents, and stories. I hung a sign on the door, "Property under legal review. Unauthorized entry prohibited." I locked up. I called the locksmith, had the lock changed, and sat on the building's stairs while he worked. I felt the air move differently, as if something within me that had slept for years had awakened. It wasn't hatred, not resentment, it was pure dignity. With firm steps, I walked back to Joyce's. That evening, she brewed chamomile tea. She served it to me in a cup with blue flowers. "You're transformed, Vic," she said to me. I smiled. "I'm not transformed. I'm who I always was.
Only now, I see myself."
I slept deeply and soundly. For the first time in a long time.
I slept without interruption. Wen I woke up, the sun shone warm and calm through the window.
I looked at my phone and saw a new message. It was from Doris and simply read, "I miss you, Grandma.
Can I see you?"
I smiled with tears in my eyes. I didn't answer immediately. I closed my eyes, listened to my heart, and knew that everything was beginning to change, in my own way at my own pace, but without going back. The following week was a symphony of meaningful silence. I was still living with Joyce, but every morning I checked the notifications from the camera installed in my old apartment. I wasn't obsessed, but I couldn't help it. Each time someone tried to open the door, I received a notification. Christian tried 3 times in 2 days. The camera recorded him turning the doorknob, pushing hard, muttering something to himself, and then hitting the door with his palm in frustration. Amber showed up one afternoon. She wore dark sunglasses, was on the phone, and paced back and forth in front of the apartment. Finally, she bent down to the doorknob. She noticed it had been changed and kicked an empty box someone had left in the hallway. The camera filmed her cursing. It was strange to see her like that, always so confident, so dominant, and now so flustered, so disorganized. Through my lawyer, Teresa, I submitted the documents proving my contribution to the apartment, my years of residence, and my transfers to Christian. She handled everything, discreetly and decisively. In parallel, we filed a formal lawsuit to reclaim my rights to the property. I didn't want to kick them out, I just wanted to claim what was mine. Joyce told me, "You're making history, Vic. Women like us usually don't raise their voices, but you are doing it with dignity." One afternoon, I received an email from the publishing house. They wanted to resume the publication of my book. "Your stories have a tenderness and depth not found every day, Ms. Victoria. We are very happy to work with you." I cried softly in front of the screen. It was as if everything I had suppressed for years was coming to the surface. Not as a scream, but as a quiet, persistent song. Doris wrote to me again. This time, she sent a voice message. Her voice sounded sad, restrained. "Grandma, Dad says he doesn't want me to see you, that you're making a fuss, but I don't believe that. I believe you. Are you okay? Can I help you in any way?" That night, I couldn't sleep. I got up, made myself something to eat, and sat by the window. Joyce's garden was lit by the moon, and I thought about how often I had completely retreated in the name of family peace. I wouldn't do that anymore. I replied to Doris. I told her I was fine, that I was doing everything because she deserved respect, that I felt no hatred for her father, but that things needed to be set right. I asked her not to feel caught between us, but simply to follow her heart. A few days later, Teresa called me. "We've invited Christian to a meeting. He has to come with his lawyer. He can't avoid it. Everything is in order."
The day came. I put on the same blue outfit.
I carefully styled my hair and arrived at the law firm minutes before the appointment.
I sat in the waiting room.
After a while, Christian walked in. He had a furrowed brow, a folder in one hand, and his phone in the other. At first, he didn't even look at me. His lawyer, an arrogant young man, tried to downplay my presence. Teresa firmly interrupted him. "I remind you that my client has lived in that house for over 20 years. We have evidence of her direct and indirect contributions. She is not a tenant, but a co-owner." Christian finally looked at me. In his eyes was a mixture of anger and confusion, as if he couldn't comprehend how this woman, his mother, who had always said yes to everything, was now sitting before him with her head held high. I didn't speak to him, I just looked at him. Teresa presented the documents, including the childhood drawing I had found in the wet box. "This may seem irrelevant, but it testifies to history, rootedness, the intention to stay, and emotionally, it carries undeniable weight," she explained.
Christian scoffed.
His lawyer wanted to argue that the house belonged to him and he had the right to decide who lived there. Teresa calmly replied, "That's not how the law works. You cannot evict your mother from the house without a court order, and certainly not without her consent. And worse, throwing her belongings onto the street is an act of financial and psychological violence." Christian squirmed in his chair. Finally he spoke, "My wife isn't comfortable with her there. It was very difficult for everyone to live together. She interferes, judges us." Teresa turned to him. "Can you prove that? Do you have evidence? Because we have messages where you asked for money, assigned her tasks in caring for your daughter, and never set boundaries regarding her presence in the house until now." He was silent. The hum of the overhead light was audible. Then I spoke. My voice was calm. "Christian, I'm not doing this to hurt you, but I also cannot allow you to erase me from your life as if I never existed. I raised you alone, without asking anything in return. What I did for you, I did without expectation, but I don't deserve this treatment. You gave me one day to leave. You did it without looking at me, without asking how I felt. You threw my things onto the street as if they were trash. That wasn't because of your wife, that was because of you." Christian breathed heavily. His lawyer tried to intervene, but Teresa stopped him with a gesture. "We are here to find a fair solution. If you want to keep the property, you must compensate Ms. Victoria. Otherwise, She has the right to live there under certain conditions. No one shouted, no one banged on the table. But the silence that followed was louder than any argument. Christian lowered his gaze, and for a moment, I saw in his face the little boy who had asked me for ice cream after school, the little boy who hugged me anxiously when he had nightmares. I said nothing more. It wasn't my job to comfort him. It was his job to face what he had done. As I left the law firm, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and relief. The sky was gray, and it was raining lightly. I sought shelter under an awning while waiting for the bus. A notification from the camera appeared on my phone. Amber had again tried to open the apartment door, this time with a locksmith, but the sign was still there, property under legal review. The technician refused to act without a court order. I smiled, not out of malice, but out of justice. Joyce greeted me with hot soup and a hug, without saying a word. How did it go? It was fair, I told her. That evening, I watched the camera footage. In one, Doris was seen alone, placing a flower in front of the locked door, a yellow flower, just like the ones she always picked in the park when we were there together. I paused the video. I covered my mouth with my hands, because everything was there, the history, the love, the memory, and above all the hope. 2 days later, Teresa called me again. They've agreed to another mediation. This time, everyone will be present, Christian, his wife, and his daughter Doris. It's not mandatory, but it can be a space to find closure, to say what hasn't been said. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to avoid it. Another, more determined part understood that I couldn't leave this story unfinished. There were open wounds that no longer belonged only to me. I agreed. I prepared with the same calm with which one prepares a cup of tea before a long night. I put on my favorite blouse, which my mother had embroidered by hand. I combed my hair, put on the earrings Joyce had given me for my birthday, and arrived on time. The room was neutral, without personality. 4 chairs, a wooden table, water, papers. Christian was already there, with a tense face and clasped hands. Amber sat beside him, arms crossed, scrutinizing me from head to toe as if looking for a flaw. Doris came in last. Her presence brightened the room. She wore a blue scarf I had knitted for her when she was years old. Teresa accompanied me, as always. We began without preamble. Christian asked to speak. Mom, I don't understand how it came to this.
I never wanted you to feel abandoned.
I just thought it would be better if you had your own space. I looked at him, not with anger, but with a serenity that seemed to come from another time. My own space after 20 years in this house, after taking care of your daughter while you worked, cooking, cleaning, being there when something broke, when someone cried, when you were emotionally absent. Christian, I never asked for anything, but I am not invisible, Amber interjected. You were always an intrusive presence. You interfered in everything, in Doris's upbringing, in what we ate, even in the living room decor. Teresa replied clearly, and did you ever communicate that respectfully? Or did you just exploit her silent help as long as it suited you, and then discard her like an old piece of furniture? Christian frowned. We didn't discard her. Then I took out the documents one by one, photocopies of transfers, handwritten letters, receipts for household purchases, old photos. In one, Christian hugged me as a child in the kitchen.
In another, Doris slept on my lap.
I placed another on the table, the wet box, the damaged photo that had survived. This is all that's left of my history when they put me on the street. My life summarized on damp cardboard. Amber averted her gaze. Teresa pushed over another envelope with copies of messages. Here is the evidence of how Christian asked for money. He asked his mother to pick up Doris from school, to cook for guests, to look after the girl when you traveled. She was not a lodger, she was an active member of the family. Christian swallowed. I didn't think it would hurt you so much. His words sounded clumsy and baseless. I looked at him for a long time. It's not just about the hurt. It's about me, for the first time in my life, saying loudly that I exist, that I'm not just a useful shadow, that I'm not just a functioning mother. I am Victoria. I am a woman, and I also deserve space, a name, remembrance. Doris shifted restlessly in her chair. She looked at me with bright eyes. I always saw you, Grandma, always. But I was afraid to say it because no one here wanted to talk. There was a dense silence. Amber abruptly stood up. This is ridiculous. If she wants recognition, she should just say so, but she shouldn't portray us as monsters. Teresa remained composed. We are not demonizing you. We are only demanding justice, visibility, respect. Christian slumped in his chair, as if each word weighed heavier than the last. Finally he mumbled, I didn't know how to handle it. I was caught between two sides. Amber said she couldn't stand the tension anymore. I just wanted peace. I looked him directly in the eyes. And you thought peace is achieved by eliminating the one who cared for you most? Did you think you would find calm by throwing me out of the house without a word? Because what you did was create a chasm between us. Doris burst into tears. I don't want it to be like this. I don't want to have to choose between my grandmother and my parents. She came to me, knelt beside me, and laid her head on my lap. I need you in my life. I stroked her hair. I didn't answer, just held her close. That was all I could do in that moment. Teresa asked for a break. We stepped out for a few minutes. Joyce called me. Everything all right? No, but it's necessary, I told her. When we returned, the tension had eased. Christian looked dejected. What should I do, Mom? He asked. I took a deep breath. I want a formal agreement. I want my rightful share of what I've built, and I want to decide where and how I want to live. Not out of revenge, but out of free choice. Amber snorted. Perfect. Keep your share and go. You owe us nothing, and we owe you nothing. Teresa noted something. That will be recorded as her position. Ms. Victoria is not seeking conflict. She is seeking legal and emotional recognition. Christian's lawyer, who had been silent until now, intervened. We can draw up a proposal for financial compensation. Christian looked at him confused. Pay my mother money? Teresa preempted him. It's not about money, it's about recognition. It's about returning what you tried to erase. Christian nodded slowly, all right. His voice was barely audible. Amber said nothing more. Doris hugged me before she left. Never disappear again. Yes, I promised her. As I walked out, the air was different, lighter, more honest. I walked without haste. With each step, I felt something within me rebuilding. Not because of them, but because of me, because of everything I had kept silent, because of everything that was now beginning to bloom. 2 days after the mediation, I found a note under the door. It was from Doris. I recognized her handwriting immediately, sweeping letters, as if each word had been written with the intention not to hurt. It said, Grandma, can I talk to you alone? Please, I have so much to tell you. My heart beat faster. I replied with a simple yes, and slid the note back under the same door, as if we were two little girls exchanging secrets. The next day, Doris arrived promptly, without her parents, her eyes full of guilt, love, and an urgent need to mend something she hadn't even broken. She brought a thermos and 2 cups of tea. I made your favorite blend, she said, chamomile tea with anise and a little orange peel, just like you taught me. I sat opposite her. The silence between us was not uncomfortable. It was dense, but necessary. We drank in silence, then she began to speak. I heard a lot at home. Arguments, accusations. Dad says he's confused. Mom doesn't want me to visit you. She says you manipulate everything. I said nothing, just looked at her as she clutched the cup with both hands. But I don't believe that. I know you, and I know them too. I know they hurt you. I know what they did wasn't fair. Her eyes filled with tears. Why doesn't anyone talk, Grandma? Why is everything in this family handled with silence, with gestures, with boxes outside the door, but never with words? I didn't know what to tell her, because her question wasn't just about this generation, but about something that had been there before. About mothers who swallowed their tears, about wives who lived without a voice, about grandmothers who retreated so much that they became useful pieces of furniture. I, too, often kept silent, because I thought that was how to survive, but not anymore. I don't want you to live in a world where love is measured by usefulness or silence. She came to me and hugged me tightly. I need you near me. I don't care what the others say. I don't want to grow up without you. I stroked her back. I'm here. I didn't leave, and now I know I have the right to stay. Not because they let me, but because I deserve it. We spent the entire afternoon together. She showed me photos on her phone, a drawing she had made of us when she was a child. We remembered songs, told anecdotes that lay dormant in our memories. Remember when you baked a lemon cake and forgot to put in sugar? I laughed softly, and your grandfather ate it anyway without saying anything. We laughed together for the first time in a long time. We laughed without guilt. She looked at me seriously. Grandma, I want to ask you something. I want you to come to my play at school. It's important to me. I nodded immediately. Of course, but you have to know that Dad and Mom will be there too. I don't know how they'll react, but I want you in the front row. I understood exactly what this gesture meant. It wasn't just an invitation, it was a declaration, a positioning, a bright crack in the wall of silence. I promised her I would come, and I kept my promise. On the day of the performance, I arrived early. I sat in the front row next to other mothers and grandmothers. Christian and Amber arrived shortly after. They saw me. Amber pressed her lips together. Christian lowered his gaze. No words were spoken, only presence. And sometimes, that is enough. The play began. Doris entered the stage with a strength I had never seen in her. Her character was a young woman trying to get her family to talk again, to bring them back together. The script seemed to be written from her heart. Every word, every gesture was like a mirror. I cried. I couldn't help it. I saw in her not only my granddaughter but all women who had ever felt lost. When the performance ended, the hall erupted in applause. Doris sought my gaze and came directly to me. She hugged me in front of everyone. Christian watched the scene, motionless. Amber grabbed her handbag and left without a word. That night, Doris stayed with me. We baked bread together. We talked about dreams, about what she wanted to study. Maybe psychology or law, or something that helps people not to hurt each other so much without realizing it. I listened to her with pride. You will change things, Doris, you already are. Before bed, she pulled a small, gift-wrapped box from her backpack. This is for you. I opened it. It was a picture frame with an old photo she had saved from the boxes, us two laughing in the kitchen. I edited the photo with an app, removed the stains, and hugged her tightly. Thank you, my darling. In that moment, I understood that although my son was still confused and Amber continued to deny everything, something had changed forever. There was a new storyline in this narrative, a new generation unwilling to repeat mistakes. Doris stood for that, for light, living memory, a voice. And I finally felt like part of something again, not a silent servant, but a root, a story that lives on. As I closed my eyes that night, for the first time in a long time, I felt peace. The day after the play, something had changed within me. It wasn't just pride in Doris, it was an inner clarity I hadn't felt in years. That morning, I looked in the mirror with messy hair and an old bathrobe draped over my shoulders and saw something new in my own eyes. I didn't see myself as a mother, not as a grandmother, not as the woman who cooks, irons, gives in, and waits. I saw myself as Victoria, whole and utterly alive. I pulled a box from the closet that I hadn't opened in a long time. Inside were letters I had never sent, photos I had never hung, and a diary I had started when Christian was born. I read the first pages, words full of hope, fear, and tenderness. Today I held him in my arms for the first time. His cry is like a melody that tears my heart apart and puts it back together at the same time. I carefully closed the diary, not with sadness, but with respect for the woman I once was and with gratitude for the woman I am now. That morning, I decided to reorganize my apartment. I moved the furniture around. I threw away old decorations that no longer represented me. I washed the curtains, turned on the radio, and for the first time in a long time, danced alone in the living room, without thinking about whether anyone was watching me, without asking anyone for permission. Doris came to visit every weekend. Sometimes she stayed overnight, brought books, showed me new TV shows, and explained new features on my phone. You have to stay connected, Grandma. A whole world is waiting for you out there. And I, who had felt excluded for years, began to feel that I could belong after all. One afternoon, Christian called me. I hesitated before picking up, but then I did. His voice sounded tense, but not aggressive. Mom, I wanted to know if you have time to talk. I took a deep breath. He asked me to meet him at an inconspicuous coffee shop. He came alone, without Amber. He wore a crumpled shirt and looked as if he hadn't slept well. We sat there for a long minute. We said nothing. Then he spoke. I've been thinking a lot, ever since Doris, ever since everything that happened. I nodded and didn't interrupt him. I know I hurt you. I have no excuses. I let myself be carried away. I lacked courage. I lacked backbone. His hands trembled slightly. Amber doesn't accept how things have turned out. She's upset because Doris wants to see you so much. She says you interfere, but I know that's not true. I'm the one who failed. Part of me wanted to tell him everything I had gone through, what I had endured, but another part understood that this was not the moment for accusations, but for honesty. Christian, you don't owe me an explanation for what you did with Amber. That's your business. But it hurt me that you forgot who I was, that you forgot what I did for you. Not out of gratitude, but out of dignity, out of remembrance. He lowered his head. I forgot, and I regret it. I don't want you to see me as a victim, but I also don't accept that you see me as a burden. I'm not an old piece of furniture that's in the way in your house.
I am your motor.
I am a woman who has lived, who has loved, who has suffered, who deserves to be seen.
I know that.
A long silence enveloped us. Can we start over? He asked, almost whispering. I looked at him. I don't know if we can start completely over, Christian, but we can continue from where we are with honesty and respect. He nodded with restrained tears. I can come by on Sunday. I'd like to have dinner together, like old times.
I hesitated for a moment.
Come, but bring Doris. I want this to be for her too.
Sunday came.
I cooked his favorite dish, meatloaf with mashed potatoes and caramelized onions. I set the table with the tablecloth my mother had given me, one with hand-embroidered flowers. Small gestures, big symbols. When the doorbell rang, my heart beat like it did when I was 20. Doris came in with a radiant smile. Behind her, Christian. We hugged with an awkward but sincere tenderness. During dinner, we talked about simple things, memories, movies, plans, nothing forced, nothing pretended. As they left, Christian took my hand. Thank you, Mom, for everything. I smiled at him. There's still a lot to do. That was the beginning of a new phase. Amber no longer spoke to me. Sometimes, when Doris is with me and receives messages from her, I see her tension. Ignore them, follow your heart, I tell her, and she nods. One day, Doris came with an unexpected gift, a small handmade wooden sign with a painted saying, "Here lives a woman who decided not to give up." I hung it on my front door. Every time I see it, I remember that I deserve to be here. Not as a guest, not as a tolerated person, but as the mistress of my own story. Recently, I started attending a writing workshop for older women. We share stories, laugh, and cry. We all have stories that have been silenced. We are all learning to tell them. One day, one of the women told me, "Your voice is strong, Victoria. It's calm, but it gets under your skin." And I thought of all the things I had kept silent for decades, all the things I had endured without a word. And I realized that every word of mine now carries weight, because it comes from a silence that lasted too long. Sometimes I walk in the park and sit on the bench where I always took Christian as a child. I close my eyes and listen to the sounds, the laughter of children, the footsteps, the wind in the leaves. And I feel like part of the world again, not a passive observer, but someone who is living, awake, present. There are still wounds, there is still distance, but there are also bridges, there is truth, there is room for me. And that, after all, is the only thing I ever wanted, to exist without asking for permission. A few weeks after that Sunday dinner, I noticed small gestures that hadn't been there before. Christian called me without any particular reason, just to ask how I was. Sometimes he brought me fresh bread or flowers from the market. We didn't talk much, but every word carried weight. It wasn't guilt he brought me, but recognition. The kind of recognition that builds slowly, like a house with new, different foundations. One afternoon, Doris came with a box in her hands. "This is for you, Grandma. I made this at school." It was a handmade book, bound with red thread. On the cover, in firm letters, was the title, The Story of Victoria. With trembling fingers, I opened it. On each page was a hand-drawn scene, me cooking, me reading, me crying silently in the kitchen, me hugging Doris when she was a child, me alone at Christian's birthday table, me opening a wet box with a letter inside. Below each picture was a small sentence. "Not everyone sees, but she was always there. Being strong means not shouting, but continuing. Love doesn't die. It only transforms." I covered my mouth with my hand. The tears didn't ask for permission. They flowed like rivers from years of restraint. Doris hugged me tightly. "This is you for me. I want the world to know this.
You are not invisible."
I treasured this book like a treasure, and then decided to do something else. I sat at the computer and opened a blank document. I began to write simple words, without pretense, just the truth. My story from the beginning, not as a complaint, but as an affirmation. I want other women like me to know that they are not alone, that they are not crazy, that they are not at the end, that they are not wrong to expect love, respect, and freedom. I wrote every night before bed, and each paragraph was a piece returning to its place within me. In the writing workshop, I read my texts aloud. One of the participants, Joyce, said to me, "You have to publish this. This story doesn't just belong to you, it belongs to all of us." And she was right. Meanwhile, Christian continued to try to get closer to me. He told me that Amber was becoming more distant, that they were fighting over Doris, that she couldn't accept that he had given in. "You didn't give in," I told him. "You just opened your eyes." He looked at me with that mixture of sadness and relief that only people who are just beginning to wake up have. Doris, on the other hand, radiated more and more each day. She decided to do a school project about invisible women. She interviewed me, recorded my voice, filmed my kitchen, my photos, my gestures. "I want people to know what isn't seen, because that's where the truth lies," she said. One afternoon, she took me to her school for a special presentation. "I don't like speaking in front of an audience," I warned her. "You just have to be there, Grandma. I'll do the rest." I sat in the front row. The lights were dimmed, the hall was silent. Doris entered the stage and began to speak. "This is the story of a woman. She wears no cape, has no awards, no followers. But her life is made of invisible acts of heroism. This is the story of my grandmother, Victoria." Images were shown, our house, the old sewing machine, my face at different ages, and my voice narrating. At 19, I became a mother. I cooked thousands of times without anyone asking if I was hungry. I wiped up vomit while I had a fever. I waited in hospitals without anyone offering me a chair. I loved in silence. I endured shouts, smiled so my son wouldn't cry. And one day, he asked me to leave, as if I were an obstacle, as if my story were worth nothing. The entire hall was silent. I could hear suppressed breaths, damp gazes. When she finished, Doris came down from the stage and walked directly to me. We hugged and cried. "Thank you," I whispered to her. "Thank you, Grandma, for still being here." That evening, I received messages from mothers, aunts, grandmothers. "Thank you for your voice. I recognized myself in it. You are not alone." It was as if an invisible network was forming, as if we were finally finding each other after so long. Christian called me that same evening. "I saw the video. I didn't know how much you had kept inside."
Now you know.
"Yes. And I want you to know that I don't want to lose you again." "Then don't." A long silence ensued, one of those silences that doesn't weigh heavily but builds something. "Can I come by tomorrow?" he asked. "Of course." The next morning, he showed up with a bag in his hand. I bought jasmine tea, Just the way you like it. He put water on to boil, got the cups. He didn't say much, but everything was said. We sat, drank in silence, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at home. Not because of the walls, not because of the objects, but because my story, my place, my voice were acknowledged. A week later, I received a letter. It was from a local publisher. We would like to know more about your story. We believe many women can find themselves in your words. I called Joyce and the others from the workshop. We will do this together, I suggested, a book from all of us. And so we began. Each wrote her chapter, and on the cover, we put a sentence Doris had written, "Visible Women, Stories No Longer Hidden." At the book launch, I was asked to say a few words. I stepped onto the small stage. I took a deep breath. For a long time, I thought my story wasn't important, that it was just one of many, that it wasn't worth telling. Today, I know that every silence we keep can become a word that frees another woman. Today, I don't speak for myself alone, I speak for all. Applause, tears, conspiratorial glances. When I came home that evening, I found an envelope under my door. I opened it. It was a drawing by Doris, me with a stack of books on my shoulders, a cup of tea in my hand, and a calm smile. My hero. I hung it over my bed and slept like I hadn't in years, with a peaceful heart, a lighter soul, and the certainty that although I wasn't wanted, I had found my way back, not to a place but to myself. A few months after the book launch, life took on a different rhythm. No more terrifying moments, no more wet boxes, no more locked doors without explanation. I went for morning walks again, as I had done when Doris was little. I stopped at the corner bakery and sat with my notebook in hand. Sometimes I wrote, sometimes I just observed, and that was okay. For the first time, I was at peace with the silence. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I no longer felt trapped in it. One morning, Christian stopped by. We're going to Doris's play at the theater. It's her first public school performance. She got a big role. We sat together in the second row. The lights dimmed, the curtain opened, and there she stood. Firm, confident, beautiful. She played an older woman fighting for her place in the family. The words she spoke were ours, were mine. I don't want permission to exist. I want to be heard, to be seen, to be respected. I am not an old piece of furniture, I am a root. Christian squeezed my hand, said nothing, but the gesture was enough. At the end, Doris came off stage, ran to us, and threw herself into my arms. How was it? You were perfect, I told her. You were brave. Christian nodded. You are stronger than both of us together. She smiled with that mixture of child and woman you see in her eyes. Then the three of us walked to the exit. Outside, the sun was low, bathing everything in golden light. It was as if the world knew something had healed, that an old wound was finally beginning to mend. A few days later, Christian invited me to lunch at his house. Just you and me, he clarified. Amber no longer lived there. They had decided to separate. Not because of me, because of many things. We were no longer going in the same direction, he said. I didn't ask further. It wasn't necessary. He set the table. I saw him cook for the first time. It's pasta with tomato sauce, like you used to make it. I tasted a spoonful. It tastes good. It needs a little salt, but it tastes good. I laughed. I'm still learning. We talked little. Not about the past, not about guilt, only about the present, about Doris, about his plans, about my writings. Are you going to write another book? Maybe, but not alone. I like working with other voices. He nodded. That's what you do, Mom. You let other voices be heard. For the first time, he called me Mom without haste, without discomfort. It was like a bridge that, though broken, was getting new planks, not the same ones but stronger. In the following months, I reconnected with my sisters and old friends. Some were still trapped in houses where they felt unseen. Others had found ways to start anew. We met on Sundays. Each brought something, food, memories, stories, and each gathering was an act of resistance against forgetting. One afternoon, Doris brought a camera. I want to film you all for a documentary. Your stories can help others. Some hesitated, but gradually they opened up. One told how she had raised 3 children alone, another how she had lost her home but never her dignity. Another, how her grandson was the first to ask her what she wanted for herself. We filmed for weeks, laughing, crying, remaining silent when silence spoke volumes. In the end, Doris edited everything with great sensitivity. She presented the film at her school, then at a cultural event, and was later invited to a youth festival. The title of the documentary was simple: We Are Not Invisible. When I first saw it in its entirety, I felt that my life was no longer a dark room full of old things. It was an open window, a bright morning, a story that could heal others if told. Christian came to the screening and sat in the front row. At the end, he hugged me. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for trying to see yourself. Do you think there's still a way for us if it's honest? Yes. If it's done with respect, yes. If we listen, always. Doris joined the hug. We're a strange family, but a real one. And she was right. We were no longer what we once had been. We didn't pretend to be someone else. But in the imperfection, there was something true, and that was enough. Amber tried to distance herself again, but I didn't let her. Not out of pride, but for my own well-being. Some people choose not to look. And I was no longer willing to retreat into the shadows to please others. The door was closed with love, but also with determination. And that too was part of my recovery, learning to gracefully close what hurt me. One day, Joyce suggested I give talks at community centers. You don't need titles, your voice is enough. I agreed. The first time I spoke in front of a group of older women, I felt dizzy, but when I looked into their eyes, I knew we all carried the same story beneath our skin. We are not here to ask for permission. We are here to remember that we are still standing.
Applause, tears.
A woman with gray hair said to me, I thought it was too late for me. Today, I don't believe that anymore. That was enough for me. I didn't need anything more. My story, which they had wanted to pack into wet boxes, was now alive, pulsating, not as revenge, but as a seed. On a perfectly ordinary Sunday, Christian came with a box, but this time it was different. It was made of wood and decorated with photos of us. Inside was a letter. Mom, this is your home. It always was. Forgive me for not seeing it. Forgive me for not appreciating it. I love you. I placed it on the mantelpiece next to a photo of me with Doris and understood without a doubt that the cycle had turned. It wasn't about erasing the pain. It was about looking it in the eye, naming it, and not letting it take control again. Doris continued to grow, firm in life, sensitive and courageous. She told me, I want to study something that allows me to tell stories, because that's what you taught me. When someone speaks, someone else is saved. And she was right. Fundamentally, she had done exactly that. Talk, not scream, not blame, but talk, say, reveal, name, so that no other woman would believe she had to accept silence as her fate. Today, my home smells of herbs, of warm bread, of fresh ink. On the shelf are books with the names of women who have now made themselves visible. On my table, there is always a cup of tea, and in my heart, there is room for all versions of myself who ever felt alone. I did not seek revenge. I sought the truth. I did not ask for permission. I opened windows. I did not impose myself. I existed. And that was enough. If someone asks me today if I regret anything, I only answer that I didn't see myself sooner.